So why don't you start us off there?
Sure.
What brought you to doing this work?
First and foremost, of course, the biggest reason that I am so passionate and involved is my own child. I'm the parent of a non-binary child who we knew at a very early age was somewhere on the gender spectrum. By age 2, was experimenting with clothing and colors, and what, although born male, did not always identify that way. And by 3rd grade, had identified gender neutral. So we knew as parents that was something we were going to be handling all the time. But I think my advocacy work dated to even before being a parent. I look at how I was as an educator and who I was as a classroom teacher. And I'm not joking that I really got every kid that every other teacher did not understand, literally. And so that tended to be in an elementary school level, a lot of students who were twice exceptional. So other teachers couldn't understand why such a bright child wouldn't perform. Or I got students who were somewhere on the gender spectrum or on the sexuality spectrum and were trying to figure themselves out and just didn't fit in. And, working with those populations, I kind of found that I was the one who would help them talk to their parents, and I was the one who would help them figure out resources. And so then as my own child found that need by 4th grade and we opened a charter, that was a big focus of the school I opened. And, 20% of our students identified somewhere on the LGBTQ plus spectrum somewhere. So that's a large percentage for a K-8 school. And I found that what was lacking was a place where parents didn't have to fight for their kids' rights to even just exist at those schools, to use the restroom that they chose, to, not be outed, etc. And so for me, it was really about developing large spaces where not only did the students feel safe, but the parents felt supported.
Thank you for sharing. Now, I'm curious, because you said your child is non-binary. For
Correct.
those who aren't familiar, aren't well aware of, what does that mean? Can you define that for us?
Yes, I think definitions are the first place to start always. I think before we even define non-binary, we need to define the difference between gender and sexuality.
Okay.
And that's truly where so many misconceptions and so many confusions lie. Sexuality is the person's sexual orientation, whether they're attracted to people of the same gender, other gender, they could be attracted to neither, they could be polyamorous, but that is their sexual attraction. That's their physical and sexual attraction. Gender, however, is how they express themselves. It's who they are on the inside. And it is always separate from their sexuality. And we tend to lump it together, and we really need to split them apart because that's where the nuances are. They are both really, and they're not even, neither of them are a binary system. They are all very spectrum oriented. So you have to think of them as, most people fall towards the end of one or toward side or the other, but there's this whole center area that is where the confusion lies and where our kids are trying to define themselves, where they come up with 1,000,001 terms because they're trying to find their little niche within that spectrum. And so I think that's the first place we start. And then, so when we look at gender, and we're specifically talking about gender, we've grown up in a world that's very binary. You're male, female. And that is what you're born with. That is your genitalia, not your gender. And when we look through history and we look through different cultures, this binary notion was not in existence in other cultures. This was not in existence until the 1800s even. And so we've really developed this rigid binary male female definition. And in between all of that are a whole group of people who aren't sure where they fall in because they're not one or the other. And so there we fall into 1,000,001 terms, and there are 1,000,001 terms that these kids have come up with for who they are within there. But the one that seems to be the most prevalent is non-binary, which means you are not male or female. You don't identify with the binary system. You just know you're somewhere in there. And the other one that's somewhat synonymous is gender fluid, which is
Yeah.
you go between the two. Purists will argue that gender fluid means you present both ways, and non-binary means that you just present both at the same time. All of that, but really, truly, that's where it falls.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm familiar with gender fluid, and I'm familiar with non-binary. So I appreciate you for clarifying that, but I wanted to make sure that our audience had, some, I guess, a starting point as far as understanding some of the ways that our students identify. Now, if I am considering myself as a non-binary, would I be more likely to utilize maybe they or them when it
Uh,
comes to
they,
pronouns?
them, or Zer are the most common. However, there are people who are non-binary who still choose to use a binary pronoun because it's easier.
Okay.
So again, you can't, just like you can't judge if someone's male or female by looking at them. It's the same
Sure.
with pronouns. It's just how they're choosing to identify. But my child uses they, them,
Okay.
which gets super complicated in conversations, especially when I have two children. People don't know if I'm talking about both of them or one of them quite
Yeah.
often. But we found if that's the pronoun they're choosing to use, that is the most important thing we can do is honor it. And
Yeah.
we still mess up all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. Uh, you're going to, especially if it's your child and you've been used to using one pronoun for a long period of time. The most important thing is that every time you do, you just catch it, apologize, move on.
Yeah.
Don't make a big deal, just move on.
I like that. Just catch it, move on. I was sharing with the group yesterday. I said, this is a challenge that I have. I will admit, sometimes with pronouns, I do make mistakes because, again, based off of how I grew up, based off of stereotypes, I see someone that looks like a male to me, and so therefore I want to use he or him. But this individual might have said, you know what? No, I prefer she or her, or they or them. And so as a result, in my mind, I'm looking at someone that I feel looks like a male. And so I mess that up a lot. And I shared with the group yesterday I was working with, and I said, this is an area that I am working on. I want to be respectful. It would be considered a microaggression if I continue to mess up the pronouns. So that's something I need to work on personally. So I am glad that you are bringing that up. I'm curious, and if you don't want to share, I completely understand.
Sure.
But as a parent, like, I would like to kind of know, how did that conversation? Because you said back in third grade is when, I guess, the
We
non-binary.
we
I guess you knew
we
already,
knew when our
but
child was 2. Yeah, at
okay,
age 2, we knew. Like, we just kind of were like, "Okay, well, we'll wait. We'll figure something." We weren't sure if it's gender, we weren't sure if it was sexuality, we weren't sure if it was both, we didn't know. But we knew that at some point they were somewhere on the spectrum, different than how they presented before. So, we just were supportive, and, I remember, in 3rd grade, my child just commenting, just out of the blue, that they were gender neutral. We're like, "Okay." And we let that go, and, things continued, and when they actually came out, like, fully came out and said, "I am non-binary," etcetera, it wasn't till, 8th grade. And we were sitting on the couch, our child walked into the room, announced it, we looked up, we said, "Okay," and we went back to what we were doing, and they were surprised, like, "Well, that's it?" We're like, "Well, we've known, we've been waiting for you to," you know?
yeah,
So for us, it wasn't difficult, but I work with a lot of families where they are completely in shock
mm,
because for them, their child didn't have any signs or exhibit any behavior or anything that they viewed as a different gender or different sexuality. And so I think that's where I have found myself doing the majority of my work now is as a teacher, as an administrator, it was creating those safe spaces. It was making sure our kids had places to be. It was training my staff. And now, as an administrator, and now more in my role now, I find that I'm working with families who are in shock or don't know how to support or don't know what to do, both as a family as well as how do I get what I need for my kid at school?
okay,
Because that's where it gets difficult. That's where, if your child is not in a safe space and you're a parent advocate, that's where it gets difficult. And then there's also the opposite. I do work with staff who are supporting students whose parents aren't supportive, and helping them get resources and how do they handle it with the parents without outing the child.
Yeah.